Hello and welcome to Fantasy Football by Ben. Today's Friday. That means I got my guest. You're on that side. I figured it out. And so today we're going to be talking just about the what we did at the beginning of last video. We won't be doing the comparing rankings this week, but maybe in the future. You can
Yeah.
introduce yourself and talk.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Eric. And yeah, we'll be going through the ECR, which is the expert consensus rankings. And we'll be talking about guys in the top 24. So that would fit in the like one or two starts. Well, whatever. I mean, so like RB1s and twos that are ranked in the ECR, we're going to talk about guys that we would fade that are ranked that high. And then guys that are outside of the top 24 that we would start. And sometimes, I mean, it will usually say like if we're thinking we'll start above those guys, or if we're just saying that they're good starts,
Matchup wise.
matchup wise. Yeah.
All right, I'll start off. And so the guy that I'm going to be fading this week, and most people are probably going to disagree with this, even if it is a tough matchup. I have Deshaun Watson, and they're going up against the Patriots this week, and that's a pretty tough matchup. And the Patriots have been really good against quarterbacks this year, actually. And so Deshaun Watson, I mean, obviously most weeks he's a must start, but this week I just don't like the matchup against the Patriots. And last week he's coming off of an awful week. Yes, it was really windy, but at the same time, he's still, I mean, he only threw for 180 yards and a touchdown. So, I mean, obviously it wasn't a very good week for him or Baker, and it was a low scoring game. It was 10-7. So, I mean, it wasn't a pretty game by any means, but I still think that going up against tough defense is a tough matchup for Deshaun Watson. And then my second quarterback that I would have you guys outside the top 12 quarterbacks that I think you guys should consider starting is Alex Smith. His last two games, he's thrown for over 300 yards. I'm not saying he's going to do it because he's never had back-to-back games in his career over 300 yards, but it's a pretty good matchup for Washington this week. And I mean, if Alex Smith's playing well, I think that he's a good quarterback. Last week he scored 17 fantasy points. I think he's been a pretty solid quarterback when he's been starting. And I don't know. I think if you have Alex Smith, I think it's a pretty solid play. I like Alex Smith this week.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Deshaun Watson definitely a kind of an interesting stat with him. So the Patriots haven't been amazing against quarterbacks necessarily, but the reason that they've been so good, really what I mean by that is quarterbacks have performed fine against the Patriots, but the biggest problem is that they're only allowing a league low 57.8 plays per game, which makes it really hard for quarterbacks to actually have a good fantasy week against them. And then also, I mean, really the biggest thing for me is like Duke Johnson is just not that good. So,
Well, he didn't see any catches last week, and that's like his biggest role.
right. So for me, that's my only concern with Deshaun is that they might throw a lot because Duke Johnson is just, you know,
But
he
the
has not been
Patriots,
performing very well. So,
J.C. Jackson's leading the league in picks, and I like McCourty's pretty well. I think they're pretty good corners, and I think Gilmore might be back this week.
yeah.
So I think their defense is definitely the problem with the Patriots defense. They just don't get pressure on QBs really, and so I think if Deshaun Watson has too much time, it could be bad. But I really like Alex Smith's matchup this week.
Yeah. No, I think Alex Smith is a good one to look for if you're desperate for a quarterback. Yeah, he's probably available in most leagues.
Probably like 95.
Yeah. So if guys that I'm fading, or the quarterback that I'm fading is Matt Ryan this week, and really the reason for that is so they're going up against the Saints, and the Saints have actually, they've been pretty good defensively. I mean, of course, against running backs, they're like really, really good, and really, it's not. I think that there's a lot of good matchups this week in the top 12 quarterbacks, but I think if we're looking at ones to fade, Matt Ryan, I think, is a pretty good choice just because, Matt Ryan, so he has been good in the last, so in, or well, he's looked pretty good in the last couple weeks. I guess that there's an easy way to say that. And I just think that the Saints are a good match or a hard matchup for him. And I don't know. I think that there's a chance that he has a rough week. So if we're looking for guys to fade, he's definitely one that I would definitely take a look at. But again, he's not. I wouldn't say tall in the world, but yeah. Anyway, so and then the guy that I am rolling out is Baker Mayfield. So I think I've picked Baker Mayfield with this in the past. But the thing is Cleveland has had really bad weather at their last 2 games, and they've both been home games, and then they're also going to be at home again this week. So there is a chance that there's another bad weather game, but I'm not going to really use that to judge. But so this week the Browns are playing the Eagles, and really the biggest slight on Mayfield is that the Browns, I think, throw the 3rd least in the NFL. So let's see, it was 48.9% of the time the Browns are throwing, which is not really a recipe for Baker to do well necessarily. However, the Eagles defense is a very conservative defense, and so I do think that makes their passing matchups hard. And Joe Burrow is really the only guy that has performed well against the Eagles in like a yards perspective. And I think he ended up throwing the ball like 45 times or something. So
that was the overtime game.
And so where I think that this is kind of a riskier play, but we're also like at the point in the season where a lot of teams are rostering 2 quarterbacks, and we're looking for guys that are not owned if you have a bad matchup at the top, like Deshaun Watson, for example. So if you're looking for someone that has a solid matchup that has like the high upside potential, I think Alex Smith is a great play, and that's probably a better play than Baker, but Baker is another one to look at. I'm not trying to. I do think Baker has a potential bust here, but also if you look at the Browns,
depends on the weather.
It does depend on the weather, and if you look at the games that the Browns where Baker has not performed well, there's always like a reason, and so his was Cincinnati this year, but then even in games that had like positive game scripts for passing, he's always performed fine. And I wouldn't say that he's been like outstanding, but I think that there's a chance that the Eagles Cleveland game could be pretty high scoring.
Yeah.
And then that definitely gives Baker a lot more passing opportunities. So, again, I guess I don't necessarily want to say to take what I'm grain of salt just because, Baker has not been the best fantasy quarterback this year. But I think if we're looking lower down and looking for guys that aren't rostered, I think Baker has the potential to go off if you're looking for someone with a has a high upside for this week. So,
well, and I like the call on Matt Ryan because he most likely won't have Calvin Ridley this week too.
Yeah.
So then they're just gonna be able to cover Julio pretty well, hopefully. So that means a big day for Hayden Hurst.
Well, yeah, always.
Let's get into the running backs. So my running back that I'm gonna fade this week, I picked James Robinson. They're going up against the Steelers this week, and James Robinson has been catching balls out of the backfield, and so I think this is a really tough matchup for him because the Steelers also don't allow passes out of the backfield to running backs a lot, and also they're a very stout, really good run defense, really good defense in general, but really good against the run. And I think James Robinson, obviously he's going to get touches. The last 2 weeks he's had over 20 touches, but I just don't think that he's going to be able to get much yards this week. And if he gets in the end zone, that's a good thing, but I don't really see him having a big fantasy football week this week against the Steelers defense. I think it's a tough matchup for him in general. So the guy that I would play over James Robinson, potentially, I don't know if I really would, but Leonard Fournette this week against the Rams. The reason why I have Leonard Fournette is because I think they're going to be playing, it's going to be a close game. Ronald Jones the last 3 weeks has fumbled 3 weeks straight. And I think that they're going to be playing from behind potentially. And so then that's where Leonard Fournette comes in because he's the receiving back. And so I think this could be a really big week for Leonard Fournette. I think he could catch 7 or 8 balls because I think he's a way better receiving back than Ronald Jones. And it's proven. I mean, he comes in on third down, even if Ronald Jones just ran for 6 yards and then 2 yards. Oh, but Leonard Fournette's out there instead of them handing the ball off to Ronald Jones because of the potential receiving down. And so I think Leonard Fournette, this could be a big game. And even if he catches like 8 balls for like 50 yards, it could be, and he has like 30 carries, it could be a big game for him, I think, this week.
Yeah. No, both good calls. Yeah, I do think Tampa, it's a hard backfield to predict, but I agree with what you're saying. And realistically, I mean, Ronald Jones has looked awesome running, but Leonard Fournette, I mean, is still also a really solid running back. So it's hard to.
Well, he's a better receiver than.
And he's a much better receiver. Yeah. So no, I think that's a good call. Yeah, and actually, I think both of our guys that we're pushing up are both similar type of plays in a way. But so first I want to say the guy that I'm fading, and I always have one of these takes every week, but I'm fading Aaron Jones. I think Aaron Jones is always still going to be a guy that most people are just going to plug in their lineup just because they have him on their team. But I think it's still important before you do that to hear this. So they're playing the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts have an incredibly good run defense. They're only allowing the third least fantasy points to running backs in the NFL, half point PPR. So this is what it is. The Colts are only allowing 17 fantasy points per game to running backs in half PPR. Okay. But literally since week 1, they've allowed the highest scoring running backs on each team: 11, 8, 8, 13, 16, 9, 7, 16, 9. So if you think about that, those are in games. So are averaging only 17 fantasy points per game. So in the games that they had 16 was the highest scoring, those were in offenses that didn't have multiple running backs. Those were usually offenses that had running backs that had really high snap shares, because that was Dalvin Cook and Kareem Hunt after Nick Chubb got hurt. Okay. And so if they're only giving up 17 points per game, the other guys that was like Kerryon Johnson, that's a committee backfield. Well, I mean, it was in week 8. Gus Edwards, that's the Ravens, committee backfield. David Montgomery is a workhorse. We think he stinks, though, so it doesn't really matter with that. The Chargers, committee backfield after Austin Eckler got hurt. And let's see. Yeah. So anyway, okay, getting that out of the way. But so my point with Aaron Jones, though, is I think because the Colts have such a stout run defense, I think that this is going to be an incredibly challenging game for Aaron Jones to actually score quality points. And also the Packers have shown that they're not scared to put Jamal Williams in games, especially on passing downs, as he's become a really good pass catcher. And not that he's necessarily better than Aaron Jones as a receiver, but I think, they're just trying to change it up a bit at times. And so for me, this is a really hard matchup for Aaron Jones to have a high ceiling. That's really what it is. But then another stat that I found that I was telling Ben earlier is that in 2.5 years as the Colts defensive coordinator, I'm not remembering his name, and that's fine. Feel free to comment his name in the comments. But the Colts defensive coordinator has only, in 2.5 years, has only given up one game that has a 100-yard rusher. There's only been one game, and that was Derrick Henry last week. So he went 2.5 years without giving up a 100-yard rusher in a game.
And it took Derrick Henry almost 30 carries.
Yeah, and it took Derrick Henry almost 30 carries. And in that game, Derrick Henry still only scored 11 fantasy points in half PPR. So, I mean, it's just an insanely hard matchup. And realistically, the way that the Packers have played is if the running game isn't getting going, Aaron Rodgers is going to throw a lot. And so I think, is Allen Lazard back this week?
He's questionable still, but yeah.
Well, either way, I just think that this is definitely going to be a pass-heavy game for the Packers, and I think it definitely has the potential to be low-scoring too. So that also will hurt Aaron Jones' ceiling this week. So it is hard to say that I wouldn't start Aaron Jones, but a guy, and this is totally up to you guys out there, and you might think I'm ridiculous for saying this, but a guy that I would consider starting, if you're not considering Leonard Fournette, is Rex Burkhead. And here's why. So the New England Patriots are playing the Houston Texans this week, and the Houston Texans are the second worst run defense in the NFL. Well, at least in fantasy. In fantasy.
I actually read a stat today that Houston, if they project it out for the rest of the season, they're going to allow 2,469 rushing yards on the season. And that's the most all time since the Lions in 2008.
Yeah, that's terrible. Wow. Well, and the Lions also have a terrible run defense this year, but they're a lot worse against receiving running backs than the Texans, because the Texans are just giving up an insane amount of rushing yards. It's them and the Cowboys, and then the Lions are the three. But so the Texans just have a terrible run defense, and I do think that Damian Harris is going to have an insane week. So Damian Harris is definitely the guy to look for first, and he has been one of the most efficient running backs in the NFL this year with his carries, and especially since he's been getting 8 guys stacked against him. And so the way that he's performed, I think he has the highest percentage of carries with 8
in the box
guys on the line. Yeah, in the box. So, and he's with how efficient he's been with that, that's pretty impressive. So I think Damian Williams is going to go off this week. Not Damian Williams. Damian Harris is going to go off this week. Yeah. But I also think that Rex Burkhead then has a chance to also perform really well, because the Patriots are averaging I think it's the most. I think they've only had 43% of their plays have been pass plays. So they're just running like crazy. They're running a ton, and for some reason James White just isn't playing anymore. I don't know if it's because of the tragedy in his life, or if he's hurt. But regardless, that definitely opens the floor for Rex Burkhead. And Rex
too far ahead.
It could be that too. Yeah.
Well, and so games they've been ahead. Right. Oh no, against the Jets now.
Yeah. But and regardless though, in the games that James White hasn't really played, Rex Burkhead has been a fantasy viable starter. He had 12 points in week 9 against the Jets, and then 18.6 against Baltimore last week. And Baltimore has a really good run defense too. So I just think, and granted, Burkhead did catch 2 touchdowns, so that kind of. But regardless of that, I do think that Burkhead is up for a big week again. And maybe it isn't necessarily a big week, but more of a fantasy relevant week. And so I would definitely say roll out Rex Burkhead and see what he does for you.
When he has 3 touchdowns in the last 3 games or whatever it was, it's pretty good. He's looked good.
Yeah, he's had 41 touches in the last. I think he's averaging 10. Yeah, 10.25 touches per game over the last 4 weeks. Which definitely for me, that's enough to put him.
Yeah, no, and I do think that Aaron Jones, especially in that offense, they're starting to do a 2-headed backfield now. Because Jamal Williams had 9 carries last week, and Aaron Jones had 13. Yeah. And they played pretty much almost the same amount of snaps. It's bad. I don't know. I like Aaron Jones, and I think that he's.
Well, where was he in the? He was at 4th, wasn't he?
Yeah.
In the consensus rankings. Yeah, he's at 4th. Yeah, he is not going to finish as the 4th running back this week. I would be absolutely shocked. There's so many guys that I would rather play over Aaron Jones this week. Mike Davis has a great matchup. Josh Jacobs against the Chiefs has a good matchup. Antonio Gibson.
No, that's a tough matchup. I think he's got a better shot than Aaron Jones this week.
Who did you just say?
Nick Chubb.
Chubb has,
because they're just a run heavy team.
Right. Well, yeah, that's always.
One also whether if it does factor in.
Yeah,
that could be a big game for Nick.
And and honestly, and I already mentioned, but Damian Harris has a.
Yeah, no.
I would put him out over Aaron Jones this week, and honestly, even Duke Johnson, because the Patriots
also don't have a good run defense.
So, and especially if. Like Ben was just saying with Deshaun Watson, if Deshaun is struggling to throw, and because the Patriots allow so little passing, or so little number of plays per game, that might give Duke Johnson the floor, even though I don't think he's very good to actually do some work. So,
well, and obviously, if he gets targets and stuff out of the backfield, that's going to help him. But last week, he literally didn't catch a single pass. So let's go to wide receivers. So I did, for my wide receiver to fade this week, I said Tyler Boyd. And he's going up against the Washington football team, and they allow the fewest points to slot receivers, and that's where Tyler Boyd does 85% of his work, if not more. And so I think this is a really tough matchup for Tyler Boyd this week, and I don't think that he's going to have a very, very good week. And I don't even think that their offense is going to pass a whole lot because Washington just gave up 149 total yards to DeAndre Swift last week and 81 rushing yards on 61 carries. And so this could be a big week for P. Ryan or Bernard, I think, potentially. But obviously, if Washington's scoring, then the Bengals are going to have to throw the ball.
Mm.
And so I think that the Bengals defense is not good. And so I think that the Bengals are going to have to throw the ball to score because I think it could be a high scoring week for Washington this week. But I don't like Tyler Boyd this week, even though most people are he's probably their wide receiver 2 or 3 this week. But
yeah, well, and the other thing too with Boyd is and Ben and I were talking about this earlier too. So Washington has only allowed 2 receivers to be finished as top 22 wide receivers this season. And if you look at the Bengals, realistically, they have 3 options at wide receiver. And especially the 3 guys that get the most targets. And I think that because of that, if we're looking at those 3 guys, Washington is the best defense against slot receivers in the NFL. So realistically, if you take which guy to take out of that, in my opinion, I think Boyd is the guy that is like the guy that you take out. Because even if he has a week like last week, which he still had 6 catches, he only had 41 yards. So, I mean, I don't think Tyler Boyd has an upside this week. If the Bengals, and you just said, like, you don't know if the Bengals are going to throw that much, but even if they do, is Boyd the guy that's going to actually show up in fantasy? It'll probably be Higgins because that's where the touchdown upside is. So,
yeah, no, that's true. And then my wide receiver that I'm going to roll out there instead of Tyler Boyd would be Jakobi Meyers this week. Jakobi Meyers is going up against Houston. We were just talking about the Houston's defense, like rushing, but also their pass defense is horrible this year. And I mean, we saw Devontae Adams go off against them, and Jakobi Meyers in the last 2 weeks, has seen 24 targets, 17 catches for 234 yards. And then he also threw for a touchdown last week. And so I think this could be a really big game for Jakobi Meyers. And ever since that Julian Edelman injury and where he's been on IR, Jakobi Meyers has been their number 1 guy, and Cam's been throwing the ball like crazy. And so I think this could be a really big week for Jakobi Meyers.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Well, and really, I mean, he's the only guy that Cam throws to.
Well, yeah.
him and Burkhead.
Yeah. Those are the only 2.
Yeah, no, I think that's an awesome call. Also, I mean, I think Ben and I would agree with on this both. Like, if Jakobi Meyers is not rostered in your league,
take him off.
And you're that team that like has just a guy sitting on the bottom of your bench that you don't play and you're not saving him for injury, go pick up Jakobi Meyers because he will help someone else beat you. Yeah. Or you can just hold him. I mean, Jakobi Meyers there's no reason for him to not be rostered in every single league.
He's the wide receiver 1 in that offense.
Yeah. And he's done a good job too. Yeah. Like, it's not like he just is, some hack. Like, he actually looks pretty good.
Well, even N'Keal Harry played last week and didn't do anything.
Right. Yeah. So the guy that I'm fading is Chris Godwin. So Ben and I have both talked about putting Tom Brady in our fade for quarterbacks this week, but the only reason we didn't was just because last week we had him in there. And
then he scored 31 points.
Yeah, and then he scored 31 points, but we don't need to talk about that. But anyway, so and this is always an Eric take every week, but I wanted to pick the guy that wasn't going to be covered by Jalen Ramsey in this game. So Tampa Bay's playing the Rams. Just horrible matchup. Like, passing wise, just do not even play a guy that is playing against the Rams. If you're going to play Mike Evans this week, will be covered by Jalen Ramsey, and he will stink. Okay, that isn't going to be my call every single week. You heard it here first. That's the hashtag for this vlog or whatever we're calling this. For Ben's thing, if you're playing Jalen Ramsey, just don't even start him. DK Metcalf was terrible. Allen Robinson was terrible, and then all the other guys that he's covered. Okay. But Mike Evans isn't even my guy that I'm fading. Mike Evans isn't even in the top 24 because Jalen Ramsey will be covering him. I say fade Chris Godwin. Also, because I think a lot of people are going to say, okay, so Jalen Ramsey's covering Mike Evans, so that means we should play Chris Godwin. And now I'm a Chris Godwin lover. I have Chris Godwin on some teams. But the thing is the Rams are insane against receivers. It's not just Jalen Ramsey. The top receivers against the Rams since, let's just say, week 5. 9 points, Tyler Lockett. 8 points, Jakeem Grant. I think I even probably said all this stuff last week about DK Metcalf. Allen Robinson, 9 points. Deebo Samuel had 15. Terry McLaurin, 4. Darius Slayton, 6. I mean, these are not startable numbers. These are awful. And so realistically, well, okay, Deebo Samuel was, but no one started Deebo Samuel that week. Anyway, but this is the thing with Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin probably has the highest floor this week against the Rams, but if the floor is 9 points, maybe go out and try to find a different guy that has a higher ceiling, because that will give you a weak win. Chris Godwin is not
going to Jakobi Meyers.
Like Jakobi Meyers.
Next guy.
Or this next guy, which is Jamison Crowder. Jamison Crowder is severely underrated. So I didn't pick Jamison Crowder because necessarily he has like this insane matchup where it's like he's going to blow up. That wasn't really why I picked him. There's other reasons though. So, I mean, and granted, the Jets are playing the Chargers, and the Chargers have not been the best against the pass anyway. But also no one trusts the Jets in general because Joe Flacco is, not that great. Although Joe Flacco did have, I think, one good game this year where he had
it was against the Patriots.
Yeah, against the Patriots. But so here's my thing. Now that Denzel Mims is playing, I think that this gives Jamison Crowder even more room to work because Denzel Mims is a legit guy that needs to be covered. Like he actually has shown as a rookie that he's pretty dang good. And so I feel like we need to put in Jamison Crowder into our lineups and start him this week. I think he deserves that. He's been awfully good this season. And I think, what was I reading? His targets are just like ridiculous this year. Yeah. So okay. So he's been out for 4. So he was hurt for 4 games this year of the 9 that the Jets have played. The last game that he played was against New England. So that was before their bye, which was last week. And he only had 2 targets, 2 catches, and a touchdown. So he scored 8 fantasy points. Scored 9 fantasy points in half PPR. But then all the other games this year, he's had over 10 targets. And I'm assuming against New England, that was more of a like rolling him out after injury. So I just say put Jamison Crowder in your lineup, start him. You don't need a reason to do it. I mean, having over 10 targets in every single game except for 1 this year is enough reason to start Jamison Crowder. And in the games he's had over 10 targets, he has been amazing. He had 20 fantasy points, 14 fantasy points, and 21 fantasy points. It was pretty good. Start Jamison Crowder.
I like that call. Jamison Crowder is a pretty underrated guy, I believe.
Yeah.
Where was he ranked on? Like 30-something?
Fantasy Pros?
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. 31. 31.
That's crazy.
Below guys like,
Mike Evans?
DJ Chark, DJ Moore, Robert Woods, who was a bad matchup this week, Robbie Anderson, but Tyler Boyd, AJ Brown. AJ Brown. AJ Brown's playing Baltimore. AJ Brown could have been a guy that we both maybe would talk about fading, but anyway.
I still like his matchup because even if it's a tough defense, I think that it's AJ Brown.
Right. All right. Move on to tight ends.
First tight end, I did Rob Gronkowski. This is the piggyback off of your Godwin because I do think that Jalen Ramsey likes moving around in that defense, and so potentially at some point he might be covering Gronk. And he has been known in his career to cover tight ends, and so I think that this could be, even if he's not covering Gronk, I still don't like Gronk's matchup against a really good defense against the tight ends this year and a really, really good defense in general. And I think Tom Brady's going to get a lot of pressure, and his safety valve isn't going to be Gronk because I think Gronk's going to be pretty well covered. It might be Cameron Brate. They might run 2 tight ends like they normally do. And so Well, actually, they did before Antonio Brown got there. But Gronk's not on the field even all the time anymore like he used to be because they switch out with Cameron Brate and him. And so I think if I'm picking a tight end to start over Rob Gronkowski this week, it would be Kyle Rudolph. And so Kyle Rudolph, the Vikings, they're playing against, who are they playing? Dallas? Horrible against tight ends. Dallas is horrible against tight ends. And I think that if Irv Smith does not play again, this could be a really, really big game for Kyle Rudolph this week. And I do like that last week he fumbled, and that was like the first time he fumbled in 100 and whatever 40 games. I still think this could be a really big game for Kyle Rudolph. And I do think that Kirk Cousins like throwing to his tight ends. And so if Irv Smith doesn't play, I think Kyle Rudolph's a guy you could plug in over Rob Gronkowski this week if you're needy of tight ends.
Yeah, I mean, the Vikings are always hard because no one ever really knows what's going to happen. I mean, and Kirk
true.
Cousins is like so volatile, but I think if you're looking for a guy like Rudolph is the guy. I mean, he's always going to have touchdown upside because he's a big boy. Without Irv Smith, that just gives him even more touchdown upside. The Cowboys are not good against tight ends. So, I mean, it's not like they're the Falcons, which we'll talk about in a second, but they still have not performed that well. And tight end is already such a terrible position anyway that Rudolph is not a bad start at all this week, I think. And yeah, also agree with Gronk. Definitely agree. Hard pass on him. Okay, so let's see, my guys. I am fading Noah Fant this week, and I don't know if this is an obvious thing or not, and it could be. But so Miami Dolphins, other than the fact that their offense or their defense is just like amazing, there's only been one tight end that has had 6 or more targets against them this entire season, and that was George Kittle, who is the most targeted player on his team. So Miami is not a team that you want to roll tight ends out against. I don't think there's not a single tight end that has scored over 44 yards or caught for over 44 yards this season against Miami. So that already gives Noah Fant has a really low floor to begin with. But also there is something to consider that the Dolphins have not really played many top tier tight ends. So the Dolphins though are allowing, 8 fantasy points to tight ends this year. And if Noah Fant scores 8, realistically that probably is a start. He's always going to have touchdown upside, but we also have to be aware that Drew Lock might not be playing this week, which, if Brett Rypien is playing, or Brett Rypien, I don't know how to say his name. You probably don't really want any piece of Denver's offense. So I would definitely fade Noah Fant. And a guy that I would consider starting over him would be Jared Cook. I think I would almost consider starting Jared Cook almost. I'm not sure that there's many tight ends I wouldn't try to start him over this week. Jared Cook has just an amazing matchup. He's playing the Falcons. He's ranked currently in ECR at 13, which is just ridiculous. Start him over Jonnu Smith, 100%. Start him over Noah Fant, 100%. Start him over Rob Gronkowski, 100%. Honestly, I would even start him over TJ Hawkinson. I would consider starting him over, Hunter Henry has a good matchup because he's playing the Jets, but there's a lot of guys that I would start Jared Cook over this week, and I would deeply consider if he is on your team and you have 2 tight ends or he's hanging out on waivers, go take a look at Jared Cook. The Falcons are giving up 15 fantasy points to tight ends this year. 15. That is horrible. That's that's really bad. That's just terrible. If Jared Cook is pretty much the tight end this week. I know that there's probably concern because news broke this morning that Taysom Hill is going to be starting at quarterback. I think Jared Cook definitely moves up way quicker if we see Jameis Winston out there. But there's a possibility I think that Taysom Hill will throw to Jared Cook. I know Josh Hill is always a concern because he steals a lot of touchdowns. So that's going to be a concern, but Jared Cook has always been kind of more of a possession tight end, and I think that he has the opportunity to just go off against the Falcons. So roll out Jared Cook this week and don't look back.
I like that call. I mean, I rated Noah Fant as like my tight end 5 this week. And I mean, looking back at it, obviously, I don't know if I would rate him there this week, but I still think that he's going to get targets because he's probably their best receiver. Him or Judy.
Yeah, I mean, and really for me, it is just because it's the Dolphins defense.
Yeah,
I mean, I think you are right that he'll probably get some targets.
Well, and that's the thing is, I was reading something that the Dolphins like blitz on like the third most in the NFL, and Rippon's not going to be ready for that.
Yeah.
So I don't know who's going to be his like safety guy or whatever, but
And so I think I do hear that, but okay, so like this is interesting. Hunter Henry had 6 targets against the Dolphins. Everett had 9 targets against the Dolphins. George Kittle had 8. Greg Olsen had 7. Okay, so those are all the guys that have had 6 or more targets against the Dolphins. In those games, Hunter Henry, 30 yards. Gerald Everett, 32 yards. George Kittle, 44 yards. Greg Olsen, 35 yards. Hunter Henry is the only one of those guys that caught a touchdown against the Dolphins.
Yeah.
And that put him over 10 fantasy points. He's the only tight end that has scored over 10 fantasy points against this year. And it was because he caught that touchdown. But he still had less than 10 yards per catch against the Dolphins. And so I do hear what you're saying is Fant's going to get targeted because he just will. And if Rippon is being hurried, he's going to throw a lot more dump offs. And if Fant is getting dump offs, that definitely gives him a floor just because. But Fant, I mean, it's not like we're looking at Tyreek Hill,
No, you're right.
So even if Fant gets 9 targets and catches 5 of them, I mean, no one has had
for like 38 yards or something or 40.
Right. Right. I mean, and
no, I get what you're saying.
So I think that really is my thing. I mean, and if Kittle to me can't score more than 6 or 7 fantasy points against the Dolphins, I'm not sure why this week at least Fant can with a bad quarterback.
But I like the call with Jared Cook this week because last week he didn't even catch a single pass.
Right. I mean,
it hurt that obviously that Drew Brees got hurt, and then in total they only threw for like 130 yards.
Yeah, I mean, Cook has not because let's see. Well, so he's had horrible matchups though the last 4 weeks.
No, yeah, you're right.
Because San Francisco is good against tight ends, Tampa Bay is good against tight ends, Chicago is good against tight ends, and so is Carolina, which Carolina is surprisingly good. But he performed against Chicago and Carolina. He had over 10 fantasy points in both those games. But then against Tampa Bay and San Francisco, he was terrible.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is one of those things. I do think that in every single league, the tight end that's playing Atlanta needs to be started.
No, I agree.
And if Jared
Cook gets to play against them twice.
Right, he's going to play against them 2 more. So he might even be a guy that you might want to look at. And I know it's already Friday, so you might not get a trade cleared by game time. But Jared Cook is definitely a guy that I would consider even trading for as a tight end or going to pick up if he's on waivers.
I agree.
So.
All right, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe if you're new. This has been Eric. Peace.
Bye.